Hello there, and welcome to A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And today, man, what a roller coaster that this film is. The 1987 Brian De Palma Untouchables. And from the off, it's quite interesting to sort of watch this faux historical. Over the last couple of years, especially films that I've covered across different shows, there's been lots of discussions about historical accuracy and using a historical, particularly recent, say 20th century, historical figures and adapting their life in a way that represents them and yet doesn't necessarily represents the facts of their lives. And yet, so you have the thing where certain films claim to be historically accurate and are not, and other films that put their hands up and say we can only be so historically accurate and still be a cinematic narrative. You have a film like Steve Jobs, which I think does a really interesting thing about taking three events, three showcases or conferences, and using them as a way to tell a three-act story. And yet it has to cover certain sections of his life, certain things have to sort of dramatically be structured in a way that we can follow. Or, you look at a film like The Big Short, and obviously being more of a sort of documentary-ish style, yet being a fictional drama, or Vice even, to sort of follow the same filmmakers, and the fact that, again, they're using it to tell a story, but history, this is supposed to be an account of someone historical. And you come to this, and what you come to realise is that this is a very 21st century idea of how we want to tell stories and sort of account for people historically, because with The Untouchables, which is supposed to be primarily centred on a historical event, that being Eliot Ness's war on the prohibitive or prohibition era war on Al Capone, and the length and methods he went to try to take him down, and of course the fact that Al Capone was eventually taken down by his tax evasion. And frankly, besides the sort of vague idea that those are things that happen, this is like a complete historical fabrication. It's one of those situations where, based on a true story, would be so loosely used, you may as well be the alien abduction film The Fourth Kind, where it said, oh, this is based on historical fact and his people's accounts. Because this is the function of the story is a romanticization of historical events to give them more a sense of scale and dramatic effect, so you actually feel. I might as well say the thing that came to my mind from the beginning, which is it's a western, it's a modern western the way it's structured. We even have Robert De Niro as Al Capone, as the black hat style, mob boss leader, transposed from the 1930s. He may as well be a Wild West gang leader, and you have Kevin Conroy's Eliot Ness as a white hat, so that when you cut to him, you have this sort of sweltering romance music as he's sort of showing affection to his wife and child, and the child still to come, and yet there's something so western about the way it's structured and the plot beats of it. And of course you have Sean Connery who comes in, and Andy Garcia, and Charles Smith, I think is his name. And they play his sort of gang of heroes, the titular Untouchables, going up against it. And the Chicago backdrop pretty much feels like a western town just scaled up. as I say, the plot beats, the characters, the structure feels like a Western. And that does give it a certain fun to it. There is something very rollicking about it, and even though it's trying to have moments of pathos and meaning and arc and a sense of, the cost of having to try and take someone this powerful down requires a man who wanted to stick to the law having to bend and eventually break his principles. And there are moments where it genuinely wants to represent a real dramatic sense of toll and sacrifice. But then there are other very campy moments where the moment where they raid successfully for the first time one of Al Capone's secret smuggling hubs. And the way that the guy says, "Oh, you need a warrant," and Sean Connery's response is to say, "Here's your warrant," and just punches him in the stomach. And it's like, oh, okay, so it's very much a film that picks and chooses when it's trying to be serious, and when it's being much more campy and like I say, much more Western. Now, a film like The Untouchables, and I suppose maybe this applies to gangster films and to westerns, do fall under a category of film that I think I grew up, and even when I chose to watch this today, I still got that triggered sense of, oh, do I want to watch this? Because growing up, I definitely grew up with, those sorts of films being something that would be on in the background when you were visiting a family member, or you're relaxing on a Sunday, there's nothing on, as you flick through the channels, you'd see something like The Untouchables, what feels like The Untouchables being on, because it does have that sense, and it does it both in the sort of gangster visage and in the Western visage, have that sense of classic cinema to it. It does. Both pro and con, it does feel a little bit like a film out of time. It feels, at certain points, like a film that should have been made in the 50s rather than the 80s. Particularly the score, which, frankly, if there's anything I don't like outright, it's the score, and the use of music in it is a little bit too old school for me. It's a bit too classic cinema, and it doesn't feel like a movie from the 80s. It doesn't feel like a contemporary of other gangster films like Goodfellas. But yeah, it does have that sense of, something that you put on and you think, oh, Kevin Costner, and you think, oh... And Kevin Costner is a very well-respected, long-standing actor. But what I came to realise, both during and after looking up things when I was watching it, is he's an actor who I have, again, sort of categorised in that sense of, oh, this is some, older person's film actor that I'm not interested in. And he definitely comes from an era of storytelling that just passed me by. And so when I think of his films, I think of things that are a little bit too old for me. And I don't mean in terms of maturity, I just mean a style of cinema that I just feel is a little outdated. Now, that's not entirely fair, because he has been an actor since this film being his first film in 87, up to, Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman. I think the problem I have with it is the fact that Costner represents a thing which I've discussed before, which is your very plain, archetypical lead. As I say, he's very much the white hat character. And for the first section of the film, when he's first brought in as the treasurer and he's coming in and he's trying to catch different Al Capone bases and he's not getting any further, the film's kind of dull. And I think the problem is because he is this very plain, standard, heroic figure that I have argued against, that if you have this character who's a lead and he's very base principles, and I know it's a Hollywood thing, the idea of having this sort of, this very easy to appeal to, very standard, everyman, and yet also quite heroic, and unfortunately, white male thing really comes into play as well. You know, it was for a long time. It was sort of treated as the default. That would be your lead. That would be your, you know, your Arnold Schwarzenegger or your Cary Grant, or, you know, across the genres, because the Hollywood argument was, oh well, everyone can appeal to that because that is sort of a white slate for everyone to sort of latch onto. And as I say, that only really works if you are a white male, or white heteronormative cis male even. You know, it doesn't appeal to anyone who isn't under that category. And I think Kevin Costner sometimes in his films embodies that, and I can see why he very quickly became there. You know, he was a lead in this, which is his first film, and continued to be a lead across his career because he embodies that same principle. And so the problem here, as I started, was the fact that I just found it very dull. I mean, the film opens with Robert De Niro, and Robert De Niro as Al Capone, I mean, frankly, I was reading up about it, and the fact that he worked so hard to try to capture the look and mannerisms of Al Capone, he gained something like 20 pounds. You know, he really wanted to represent the character in a historically accurate way. As I say, that feeds into the sense of part of this film wanting to be a historical drama. And it does feel like Robert De Niro should have played Al Capone because of the effort he put into this in a more of a biopic sense. And he opens the film, but he's actually not in the film a great deal. He disappears for long swathes of it because we know what happens to Al Capone historically. Instead, what they do is they have another villain called, who is again a real life person named, I think, James Neaty, who essentially is his sort of bag man, and he's the one who, when Al Capone needs something done, he sends this guy out, and he in fact kills several of Ness's team, and he does some of the more horrifying crimes. And when that film's on, when it started with that, I was like, oh, maybe I can get on board with this quite quickly. And I was shocked when it opens with a bomb being given to a little girl and then killing that little girl. And it's like, oh my goodness, this film is a lot more mature and a lot more takes itself a lot more seriously than I was anticipating. To then have the Kevin Costner stuff, which feels, for that stretch, like a different film. Because it does feel quite noble and old-fashioned, but in terms of sort of the storytelling as well as the characterization, and that does feel is hard to get around. But then they bring Sean Connery in, and Sean Connery masters the screen. You know, like Robert De Niro, Sean Connery easily just takes control, and he plays this cop who's just this old beat cop who, frankly, is, you know, he's a good police officer, but he never wanted to climb the ranks. And yet he knows enough about the street that he becomes almost like a guide to Eliot Ness. And from then, they recruit, you know, two more members. The Oscar Wallace, who is this FBI accountant who represents the nerd, who sort of knows how to handle himself, but is much more comfortable in paperwork and numbers. And the fresh greenhorn recruit. What's his name, to make sure I get it right, because his name is, he goes by, I think, Gary Smith, or something like that, when his name is actually something like Carluccio Pietra, because he's Italian. But you get that as there's our core team, and once they're together, and once that kicks off, the film really does go into high gear. And as I say, it leans into that Western campy action romp all the way through, and then every now and then it'll have moments of real darkness, and you know, it's this. I thought this was a Sunday afternoon film, but then it'll have things like people dropping F-bombs and, you know, moments of genuine, quite shocking violence. So you go, oh, okay. And then unfortunately, it then also switches back to a moment where, say, Kevin Costner's with his wife, Catherine Ness, who's played by Patricia Clarkson, and they do have really good chemistry, but again, for those small beats, it feels like you're slipping into a different film, almost like a 1950s romance film. And so the film jumps from one to the other in terms of it goes from gangster film to western to romance to psychological thriller to political. And this is where I'm going to finish the spoiler-free stuff, because, yes, obviously you should watch The Untouchables. It's a classic 1987 film. Far be it from me to say, yes, you should see it. It is more remarkable as an artifact. But then you get to the end of the film, and I do want to talk about this ending. So, and this is full spoilers going forward. This is the point where things really take a shocking turn. Well, it does things that you kind of expect, where, for instance, I was waiting for one of the team to be killed. And they are. It's Oscar Wallace, the nerdy one, who gets killed by Neaty, the gangster. But also because he wants to kill the witness who he's protecting. And you think, okay, I see where that's going. And then everything's falling apart. And then you have Sean Connery, who has an extended section of him basically pulling his resources to try to salvage the case. And then you have this actually really awesome tracking shot where Al Capone has sent a man to kill him in his house. And immediately Sean Connery is ready with a shotgun and says the iconic line, "You shouldn't bring a knife." Oh no, he says something, unfortunately, yeah, he does drop a slur for an Italian, which I won't say because it's, it's not, it is a dated language. But basically says, typical for a something to bring a knife to a shotgun fight, and chases the guy out. Only then to be gunned down by a minigun. And the death of Sean Connery is the point in which I was, and this is not that far from the end. There's enough time that I'm thinking, do I want to watch this film with Sean Connery gone? And actually, and this is where I have to credit Kevin Costner, the moment after that, I've gotten so used to his character and the fact there are only two of the Untouchables left that they, that you actually genuinely want to know how this is coming to an end, and you see moments where Kevin Costner is confronting Al Capone in almost practically a fist fight, and you think, well, that's definitely not historically accurate. And then we get to the trial because of the sacrifice that Sean Connery's character makes, and then it gets to a point where Kevin Costner basically confronts and manages to prevent Neaty, this gangster who's killed two of the team, from basically bringing a gun to the court case? Or something to that effect. Not entirely sure what that plan was there. Thanks to an usher, they both work out, they both take him out, check his stuff, but then he's apparently allowed to take the gun in because of a letter from the mayor, only for Kevin Costner to see Sean Connery's character's address in a book or a letter and point it out, at which point there's a big final confrontation between him and Neaty that leads to a chase onto a roof and a fairly action-heavy scene, and you're thinking, well, this is on the courthouse whilst Al Capone is being tried, and you think, well, this is drawing a lot of attention. Anyway, they have their big final confrontation, at which point Kevin Costner's about to take him in, and then Neaty says something jeering about Sean Connery's character, at which point Kevin Conroy throws him off a roof. Oh, he says something Neaty says something along the lines of, he squealed like a pig when he died. Kevin Costner throws him off the roof. You hear him going, "Ah!" starting to yell, and then Kevin Costner, as he's falling, says, "Did he sound something like that?" For him to then to continue to yell for another 10 seconds. So collectively, this guy yells for about 25, 30 seconds. Enough time for Kevin Costner to say the line, and then another 10 seconds to pass before he falls onto a car and dies. And you think, bloody hell, that was a high roof for that all to happen. And then people are sort of reacting to it, but in what's going on? And they come up, and then as he goes back down to the court case, people say to him, do you know where this Neaty guy is? Because, and he says, he says a James Bond style line, saying, he's in the car. Meaning he's literally, been thrown onto a car. And then there's a big, the trial, so the judge, after being told a lie that he essentially is in the ledger of people who Al Capone wants to get rid of, panics and says they want to swap juries. Now, I don't know if that is something that happened historically. I struggle to believe it. But and as soon as he decides they're going to switch juries, because it turns out the entire jury was bribed by Al Capone, that's the point in which Al Capone's lawyer, with no consultation, decides to say, "Oh, we're going to switch to a guilty verdict," which Al Capone panics about, and everything's chaos. And then in the chaos, Elliot Ness goes up to Al Capone and essentially says something, sort of says something jeering back that he's, a line that he'd said to him earlier. And then that's sort of the end of that. And then just at the end, and this is the very end of the film, Kevin Costner's leaving, and then a reporter comes up to him and says, "Oh, have you heard they're going to repeal the prohibition?" And Kevin, what are you going to do next? And then Kevin Costner says, "Oh, I'm going to have a drink like it's a Western or a James Bond film," and just walks off. And it's like, what? This is ridiculous. This is a remarkably ridiculous film. I mean, I have to say, I did have a lot of fun. And the campy action sense of like, oh, well, this is historical, but we're going to really bend that. And I have to admire, like, Brian De Palma, who I primarily know from the first Mission Impossible film. He really did make it very fun to watch this thing and kind of go, well, I'm sure if I read about this, I would learn none of these things happen the way that they should. But it was fun. It was really fun, and like I say, there was something ludicrous about it that I didn't anticipate. Anyway, thank you for joining me. If you like this video, hit the like button, comment below, and share the video, because this will help me in the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell to get notifications of when new videos are uploaded. Do check out my back catalogue. There's over 150 reviews. And follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley, where I'm always tweeting about TV shows and films, and I share the links once they are on YouTube. Thanks for joining me. Take care.